Divorce papers usually signal an end, but for Greg Mitchell, they were a victory lap. He didn't just leave his wife, he scorched the earth, parading his 24-year-old upgrade around Chicago, while Sarah scraped together change for coffee. Greg thought he had finally won the lottery of life, shedding the dead weight of his past. He had no idea that while he was busy bragging about a leased Audi and a trophy wife, Sarah was exactly 48 hours away from a phone call that would turn her into his boss and the sole owner of the billion-dollar empire he was desperate to join. Betrayal has a price, and Sarah was about to collect it. The sound of a ceramic plate hitting the floor didn't shatter the silence. It just punctuated it. Sarah stood in the middle of the kitchen, looking at the broken pieces of her favorite pasta bowl. Across the granite island, granite she had spent 3 years saving to install, Greg didn't even flinch. He just checked his watch, a heavy, brushed steel Tag Heuer that cost more than Sarah's first car. "You're being dramatic, Sarah," Greg said, his voice smooth, practiced. It was his sales voice, the one he used to close deals on mid-range software packages. "I'm not doing this to hurt you. I'm doing this because I've evolved. We're mismatched." Sarah looked up, her eyes burning but dry. "Mismatched? Greg, I worked 2 jobs so you could get your MBA. I paid the rent on this apartment for 4 years while you networked at golf courses." Greg sighed, running a hand through his perfectly gelled hair. He walked over to the fridge, grabbing a sparkling water, "And I appreciate that, really. But let's be honest. Look at you," he gestured vaguely at her outfit. "Oversized sweatpants and a stained university hoodie. I'm moving into a different tax bracket, Sarah. I need a partner who looks the part. Someone who understands the aesthetics of success." "The aesthetics of success," Sarah repeated, the words tasting like ash. "Is that what you call Tiffany?" Greg's jaw tightened. "Leave Tiffany out of this. She supports my vision. She's young, she's vibrant, and frankly, she doesn't smell like bleach and desperation." That was the dagger. Sarah worked as an assistant manager at a high-volume catering company. She spent her days scrubbing equipment and managing chaotic schedules so Greg could buy tailored suits. "I want you out by Friday," Greg said, setting the water down. "I've already spoken to the landlord. Since my name is the primary on the lease and you've missed the last 2 utility payments—" "Because I paid your credit card bill!" Sarah screamed, her composure cracking. "Details." Greg waved a hand dismissively. "The point is, Tiffany is moving in on Saturday. We're redecorating. I'd appreciate it if you didn't leave a mess." He walked to the door, grabbing his coat. "Oh, and Sarah, don't try to fight the prenup. I know we didn't have money when we signed it, but my lawyer says it holds up. You leave with what you brought in, which, if I recall, is nothing." The door clicked shut. Sarah didn't cry. She couldn't. The shock was too absolute. She looked around the apartment in Chicago's Lincoln Park, a place she had made a home, and realized she was being evicted from her own life. She packed her life into 4 cardboard boxes. She moved into a studio apartment in a crumbling building near the airport, a place where the radiators clanked all night and the sirens never stopped. For 3 weeks, she lived on instant noodles. She blocked Greg on social media, but she couldn't block the mutual friends. The texts trickled in, screenshots she didn't want to see. Greg and Tiffany in Cabo, Greg buying a new Audi, Greg posting a photo of a diamond ring with the caption, "Finally found a diamond that shines as bright as my future." He was bragging. He was loudly, publicly celebrating her erasure. He wasn't just happy, he was euphoric that he had shed her. Sarah sat on her futon, staring at her bank account. Balance $412.50. She had to go to work tomorrow. She had to smile at clients. She had to pretend her heart wasn't a jagged ruin in her chest. 2 months later, the unavoidable happened. It was the annual Chicago Young Professionals Gala. Sarah wouldn't have gone, but her boss, a stern woman named Linda, insisted. "We're catering the event, Sarah. I need you on the floor making sure the servers don't drop the shrimp." So Sarah was there, not as a guest, but as staff. She wore the company uniform, black slacks, a white button-down, and a black apron. She was invisible, a ghost moving between the high-top tables, refilling wine glasses. And then she heard him. "It's all about leverage, boys. You have to know when to cut your losses." Greg was standing near the ice sculpture, holding court. He was surrounded by 4 other men, all in expensive tuxedos. Clinging to his arm was Tiffany. Tiffany was stunning, objectively. Blonde, statuesque, wearing a red silk gown that likely cost more than Sarah's annual rent. She was laughing at everything Greg said, her hand stroking his bicep. Sarah tried to turn away, to duck into the kitchen, but the crowd was too dense. "Greg," someone shouted, "is that your ex?" The air left the room. Greg turned, his eyes scanning the crowd until they landed on Sarah. For a second he looked panicked. Then a smirk curled his lips. He whispered something to Tiffany, who giggled, and they walked over. "Sarah," Greg said, his voice loud enough to attract onlookers, "I didn't know you attended these things." He looked her up and down, noting the apron. "Ah, working. Good for you." "It's honest work," Tiffany chimed in, her voice high and breathy. "Oh, is this the Sarah you told me about? The one who loved coupons?" The men behind Greg chuckled. Sarah gripped the tray of empty glasses so hard her knuckles turned white. "Hello, Greg. Tiffany. Enjoying the event?" "We are," Greg beamed, puffed up with arrogance. "Actually, we're celebrating. I just landed a massive account. Halloway Logistics. You know them? Global shipping? I'm going to be the lead director of North American sales. Big bonus coming in." Sarah froze. Halloway Logistics. The name sounded vaguely familiar, but she couldn't place it. "That's nice, Greg," she said quietly. "It's more than nice, sweetie." Greg stepped closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "It's vindication. I told you I was destined for big things. You were just holding me back. Look at you, serving drinks, while I'm about to buy a vacation home in Aspen." He reached out and patted her shoulder, a condescending, pitying tap. "If you need a tip, let me know. I'm feeling generous." He pulled $100 bill from his pocket and tucked it into her apron pocket. The room seemed to tilt. The humiliation was physical, a hot wave of nausea. People were watching. Some looked pitying, others amused. Sarah stared at the bill sticking out of her pocket. She wanted to scream. She wanted to throw the drink in his face. Instead, she took a breath. She pulled the bill out, placed it on his passing tray, and looked him in the eye. "Keep it, Greg. You're going to need it more than I do." She turned and walked into the kitchen, her head held high, shaking with rage. She didn't know how prophetic her words were. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, buried under a stack of final notice bills for medical expenses Sarah had incurred for her late mother years ago, another debt Greg had promised to help with, then abandoned. The envelope was thick, cream-colored, and heavy. The return address was embossed in gold leaf. Pendleton, O'Malley and Associates, attorneys at law. Sarah opened it with a trembling hand, expecting a lawsuit. Maybe Greg was suing her for the coffee maker she took. "Dear Miss Sarah Mitchell, it is with solemn duty that we inform you of the passing of Mr. Frederick Arthur Halloway." Sarah frowned. Uncle Fred? She remembered him only as a grumpy, reclusive old man she had visited a few times as a child with her grandmother. He had been the black sheep of the family, a man who refused to attend holidays and lived in a dusty old estate outside of Seattle. Her grandmother had always said, "Fred just likes his books more than people." She hadn't seen him in 20 years. She had sent him a Christmas card every year, mostly out of habit, and usually included a short letter updating him on her life. He never replied. "As per the last will and testament of Mr. Halloway, you have been named the sole beneficiary of his estate." Sarah blinked. Sole beneficiary. She assumed that meant the dusty house and maybe a collection of old books. It might be enough to pay off her debts. Maybe $50,000 if she was lucky. Please contact our offices immediately to arrange for the reading of the will and the transfer of assets. She called the number. A secretary put her through immediately to a man named Arthur Pendleton. "Miss Mitchell." The voice was grave but kind. "We've been trying to find you. Your address seems to have changed recently." "Yes," Sarah said, sitting on the floor of her studio. "I went through a divorce." "I see. Can you come to our Chicago branch tomorrow? We need to go over the portfolio." "Portfolio?" Sarah asked. "Mr. Pendleton, is there enough to cover the travel? I'm a bit tight." "Right now." There was a long pause on the other end. "Miss Mitchell," Pendleton said, his voice dropping an octave. Mr. Halloway was a very private man. He didn't like publicity, but he was the silent founder and majority shareholder of Halloway Global Logistics. The phone slipped from Sarah's ear. Halloway Logistics, the company Greg had just been hired by. The company Greg was bragging about. "I don't understand," Sarah whispered. Frederick Halloway owned 51% of the company, along with substantial real estate holdings in Seattle, New York, and Zurich, Pendleton continued. "He followed your life closely, Miss Mitchell. He received every letter you sent. He knew about your struggles. He knew you were the only one who didn't ask him for money." Sarah felt lightheaded. "How much are we talking about?" "After taxes and charitable deductions," Pendleton said, "the liquid assets are valued at approximately $1.2 billion. The stock valuation puts your controlling interest at another $4 billion. You are, effectively, the owner of the company." Sarah sat in silence. The radiator clanked. A siren wailed outside. "Miss Mitchell, are you there?" "I'm here," she squeaked. "There is one condition," Pendleton said. "Your uncle was very specific. He knew you were going through a divorce. He had private investigators watching your situation. He didn't like how you were treated." Sarah's skin prickled. "He watched me?" "He protected you. The condition is this. You must take an active role on the board. You are not to sell the shares for at least 1 year. You have to learn the business. He wanted you to find your backbone, if I may be so bold." Sarah looked at the instant noodles on her counter. Then she thought about Greg. She thought about the $100 bill he had tucked into her apron. She thought about Tiffany laughing at her. "Mr. Pendleton," Sarah said, her voice steadying, "what time should I be there?" Here are part 4 and part 5 of the story. The transition from Sarah the catering manager to Sarah Halloway majority shareholder did not happen with a magic wand. It happened in a windowless boardroom on the 45th floor of the Pendleton and O'Malley building, and it was grueling. For the first week, Sarah felt like an imposter. She sat at a mahogany table that was longer than her entire studio apartment, listening to Arthur Pendleton and a team of financial advisors speak a language she didn't understand. EBITDA. Q3 projections. Liquidity ratios. Hostile takeover defense. "I think we should hire a proxy to vote your shares, Miss Mitchell," suggested Charles Verify, a senior accountant who looked at Sarah with thinly veiled disdain. He saw her cheap shoes. He saw the way she hesitated before speaking. "You can take the dividends, buy a nice house on the coast, and let the professionals handle the logistics empire. It's a beast of a company. It eats the weak." Sarah looked at him. 3 days ago, she would have agreed. She would have taken the check and run. But the image of Greg's smirk at the gala was burned into her retinas. "If you need a tip, let me know." She wasn't doing this for the money anymore. She was doing it for the woman who had scrubbed pasta sauce off industrial stoves for 4 years while her husband played pretend executive. "No proxy," Sarah said. Her voice was quiet, but it didn't shake. "My uncle didn't leave this company to a proxy. He left it to me. If I'm too weak, I'll learn to be strong. If I'm uneducated, teach me." Arthur Pendleton smiled, a genuine, sharp smile. "Excellent answer. Gentlemen, clear your schedules. We're going to school." The next 3 months were a blur of transformation. Sarah quit the catering job, citing family issues. She moved out of the studio and into a secure, high-end condominium in the Gold Coast district, under the name of a Shell LLC, to keep her identity private. She hired a team, not stylists at first, but tutors. She spent 12 hours a day learning corporate structure, global shipping logistics, and the specific inner workings of Holloway Global. She memorized the names of the board members. She studied the flow of goods from Shanghai to Rotterdam. Then came the physical transformation. It wasn't vanity. It was armor. She hired a consultant named Beatrice, a terrifying woman who had styled first ladies. Beatrice threw out every piece of clothing Sarah owned. "You dress like you're apologizing for your existence," Beatrice said, holding up a beige cardigan with 2 fingers. "Burn it. When you walk into a room, you are the gravity. You don't ask for attention. You command it." They cut her hair. Gone was the limp, shoulder-length ponytail. In its place was a sharp, asymmetrical bob, dyed a rich, dark chestnut that made her green eyes look dangerous. She learned to walk in Italian heels, not the clunky ones she used to wear to weddings, but sleek, lethal stilettos. She learned to apply makeup that highlighted her cheekbones, making her look angular and severe. When she looked in the mirror 3 months later, she didn't recognize herself. The tired, fearful woman was gone. In her place was a stranger who looked like she could buy the building she was standing in, which, technically, she could. But the most important part of her transformation wasn't the clothes. It was the information. She had requested the personnel files of the North American Sales Division. Specifically, she wanted the file of the newly appointed director, Gregory Mitchell. Sarah sat in her home office, a glass of expensive red wine in hand, and opened the digital file. Greg had lied. He had told her, and everyone at that gala, that he was a superstar. The file told a different story. His sales numbers were slightly above average, but his client retention rate was abysmal. There were notes from HR about inappropriate delegation of tasks and taking credit for team efforts. He hadn't landed the Holloway job because of his brilliance. He had landed it because the previous director, a man named David Ross, was an old fraternity brother of Greg's. It was cronyism, pure and simple. And then she saw the expenses. Greg had a corporate credit card. In the last 2 months, he had charged $15,000 in client entertainment. Sarah cross-referenced the dates. May 12th, dinner at Le Bernardin, NYC, $800. Client listed, Tech Corp. May 12th, Greg's Instagram post showing him and Tiffany at a Broadway show in NYC, with the caption, "Spoiling my girl." June 4th, office supplies, $2,400. June 4th, a receipt from an electronics store for a 75-inch OLED TV. He wasn't just arrogant. He was stealing. He was embezzling from the company Sarah now owned. She picked up her phone and dialed Pendleton. "Arthur," she said, her voice cool and crisp. "I'm ready for the board meeting. But before we announce the ownership change publicly, I want to pay a visit to the Chicago branch. Incognito." "Incognito, Miss Mitchell?" "Yes. Introduce me as a consultant sent by the trust to audit efficiency. I want to see Mr. Mitchell in his natural habitat before I tear it down." Greg Mitchell was feeling untouchable. He sat in his corner office. Well, it wasn't a corner office, but it had a window, spinning a stress ball and looking at his reflection in the computer monitor. Life was good. Tiffany had just moved in, and while she was high maintenance, she was currently demanding they upgrade to a penthouse. She looked incredible on his arm. He had maxed out 2 personal credit cards to pay for the lease on the Audi and the deposit on the new apartment. But it didn't matter, the quarterly bonus was coming. David Ross, his buddy and boss, had promised him a fat check. Greg? He spun around. It was Toby, the junior analyst. Toby was 22, brilliant, and terrified of Greg. "What is it, Toby? I'm busy strategizing," Greg snapped, minimizing the window where he was browsing luxury watches. "I finished the proposal for the logistics merger in Detroit," Toby said, handing over a thick binder. "I stayed up all night. The projections are solid. I think this could save the company $3 million a year." Greg took the binder and flipped through it. It was good. It was very good. It was the kind of work that got people promoted. "Leave it with me," Greg said dismissively. "I'll clean it up. It's a bit rough around the edges." "Oh, okay. Do you think I can present it at the regional meeting on Friday?" Greg laughed. Toby. You're not ready for the Sharks. I'll present it. I'll make sure your name is mentioned." Toby's shoulders slumped, but he nodded and left. As soon as the door closed, Greg opened the file, deleted the title page that said "Prepared by Toby Evans," and typed in "Prepared by Gregory Mitchell, Director of Sales." He hit print. Later that afternoon, David Ross poked his head in. David was a large man with a red face and a loud laugh. "Heads up, G-Man," David said. "We've got a visitor, some auditor sent by the Halloway estate. Apparently, since the old man died, the lawyers are sniffing around." Greg rolled his eyes. "Great. Some bean counter. Do I need to hide the good scotch?" "Just look busy," David winked. "She's supposed to be a real hard ass. Name is Miss Miles or something. She's touring the floor in 10 minutes. "I can handle a woman with a calculator," Greg said, straightening his tie. "I'll dazzle her." 10 minutes later, the floor went quiet. Greg stood up and walked to the door of his office, leaning against the frame to get a good look. He wanted to see what kind of dowdy librarian they had sent. Then he saw her. Walking next to David Ross was a woman who looked like she had just stepped off a runway in Milan. She wore a charcoal grey pencil skirt that fit perfectly, a cream silk blouse, and a blazer that screamed expensive. Her heels clicked on the linoleum with a rhythm that sounded like a ticking clock. She had oversized sunglasses on, pushing them up into her dark, angular hair as she scanned the room. She held a tablet in one hand, tapping on it with a manicured nail. Greg felt a stir of interest. "Hello, nurse," he thought. This wasn't a librarian. This was a player. He watched as she stopped at Toby's desk. She leaned down, said something to the kid, and Toby lit up, pointing at his screen. She smiled, a rare, brief smile, and nodded. Then she turned towards the offices. "And this," David Ross said, his voice booming, "is our Director of Sales, Greg Mitchell. Top talent." Greg flashed his 1,000-watt smile. He stepped forward, extending a hand. "Pleasure to meet you. I'm Greg. And you are?" The woman stopped 5 feet away. She didn't take his hand. She just looked at him. Her eyes were green, piercingly, familiar green. For a second, Greg's brain short-circuited. The eyes looked like Sarah's. But the rest of her? The glowing skin, the sharp jawline, the aura of absolute power? It couldn't be. Sarah was a mouse. This woman was a lioness. "I'm Miss Miles," Sarah said. Her voice was deeper, controlled, stripped of the apologetic tone she used to have. She didn't blink. "I'm reviewing the department's efficiency." "Well, Miss Miles," Greg lowered his voice to a smooth purr, "if you need a tour, I'd be happy to show you the ropes. We run a tight ship here." "Do you?" She looked past him, into his office. "Is that a 75-inch television on your wall, Mr. Mitchell?" Greg's smile faltered. "Ah, yes, for video conferencing. Client presentations. I see." She tapped something on her tablet. "And the merger proposal on your desk? The Detroit project?" "Yes," Greg beamed, happy to shift the subject. "Just finished it. It's a game changer. My baby." "Your baby," she repeated. Her expression was unreadable. "Impressive work." That's why I'm the director." Greg chuckled, relaxing. He thought, "She likes me. I've got this." "We'll see," she said. "I'll be observing the regional meeting on Friday. I look forward to hearing you present your work." She turned on her heel and walked away. Greg watched her go, a strange unease settling in his gut. There was something about her. The way she looked at him wasn't with admiration. It was with the cold, clinical detachment of a butcher examining a cut of meat. He went back to his desk and texted Tiffany. "Auditor is a babe, but intense. Think I charmed her, though. Bonus is in the bag. Let's book the trip to Fiji. He didn't know that 3 offices down, Sarah was sitting in a temporary workspace, watching the security feed from his office on her tablet. She watched him text. She watched him put his feet up on the desk. She picked up her phone and called Pendleton. "He took the bait," Sarah said. "He's going to present the stolen work on Friday. Make sure the entire board is there." "And Arthur?" "Yes, Miss Mitchell?" "Bring the forensic audit of his credit cards. I want it projected on the main screen right after his presentation. That's exceptionally cruel, Sarah," Pendleton said, sounding delighted. "It's not cruelty, Arthur," Sarah said, watching Greg laugh at something on his phone. "It's just business. Aesthetics of success, remember?" She hung up. The trap was set. Friday wasn't just going to be a meeting. It was going to be an execution. Friday morning arrived with a sky the color of bruised iron. Inside the Holloway Global Conference Room, the war room, as the executives called it, the atmosphere was even heavier. Greg stood at the front of the room, adjusting his cufflinks. He felt a bead of sweat trickle down his back, which was annoying. He had rehearsed this. He looked good. But he hadn't expected the audience to be this large. Usually, regional meetings consisted of David Ross and a few department heads. Today, the long, oval table was full. There were 12 people seated, most of whom Greg didn't recognize. Men in 3-piece suits, women with icy stares. And at the far end of the table, sitting in the shadows away from the projector's glare, was Miss Miles, the auditor. She was tapping a pen against her lips, watching him. "You may begin, Mr. Mitchell," David Ross said, though he looked uncharacteristically nervous. He kept glancing at the strangers at the table. Greg cleared his throat. "Good morning. Today I'm proud to present the Detroit Optimization Strategy, a plan that I have personally developed over the last month to streamline our Great Lakes supply chain." He clicked the remote. The first slide appeared. It was flashy, filled with buzzwords. Synergy, vertical integration, cost-benefit analysis. Greg launched into his speech. He was charming. He made eye contact. He used his sales voice. He explained how cutting middle management in Detroit would save 12% in Q4. He didn't notice that the people at the table weren't taking notes. They were exchanging glances. When he finished, he flashed a winning smile. "And that, ladies and gentlemen, is how we take Holloway to the next level. I'm happy to take questions." Silence. Then a voice cut through the room like a whip. "The slide regarding the fuel surcharge projections," Miss Miles said, not standing up. "You used a variable based on the 2023 index. Why didn't you use the 2024 projections released last Tuesday?" Greg froze. He hadn't written the report. Toby had. He had no idea what index was used. "Well," Greg stammered, his smile tightening, "I felt the 2023 data was more stable, historically speaking." "Incorrect," Miss Miles said. She stood up. The 2023 index would result in a 4% underestimation of costs. It would bankrupt the Detroit hub in 6 months. Anyone who actually wrote this proposal would know that. Greg's face flushed red. "Now look here, Miss Miles. I've been in this industry for—" "Toby," Miss Miles interrupted, looking towards the door. "Please come in." The heavy oak doors opened. Toby, the terrified junior analyst, walked in. He looked like he wanted to vomit. "Toby," Miss Miles asked, her voice softening, "why did you use the 2023 index in your draft?" Because I didn't have access to the 2024 paid database, ma'am," Toby squeaked. "I put a note in the margin saying it needed to be updated before presentation, but the note is gone." Miss Miles looked at Greg. "The note is gone because Mr. Mitchell deleted it when he put his name on your work. Isn't that right, Greg?" Greg slammed his hand on the podium. "This is outrageous. I am the director here. I supervise Toby. His work is my work. Who are you to question my leadership?" He pointed a shaking finger at her. "I don't know who you think you are, lady, but I'm going to have you thrown out. David, get security." David Ross didn't move. He was staring at his shoes. Miss Miles began to walk down the length of the table toward Greg. As she walked, she reached up and removed her oversized glasses. She reached into a pocket and pulled out a tissue, wiping the severe, dark lipstick from her mouth. She stopped 3 feet from him. "You really don't recognize me, do you, Greg?" she asked. Her voice dropped the corporate affectation. It sounded like the woman who used to ask him if he wanted coffee in the morning. Greg squinted. He looked at her eyes. He looked at the shape of her mouth. His brain refused to process it. It was impossible. Sarah was a loser. Sarah was broke. Sarah wore sweatpants. This woman was a titan. "Sarah?" he whispered, the word escaping like a gasp. "Hello, Greg," she said. He laughed. It was a hysterical, panicked sound. "Sarah, oh my God, you got a job here? As an auditor?" He turned to the board, desperate to seize control. "Everyone, listen to me. This is my ex-wife. She's mentally unstable. She's doing this to get back at me because I left her for a younger woman. This is a conflict of interest. She has to be removed immediately." He looked around the table, expecting nods of agreement. Instead, he saw stone-faced silence. "It is a conflict of interest," Arthur Pendleton spoke up from the center of the table, "which is why Miss Mitchell recused herself from the vote regarding your employment. However, she did not recuse herself from the prosecution." "Prosecution?" Greg paled. "What are you talking about?" Sarah turned to the screen. She clicked a button on a remote she held in her hand. The screen changed. It wasn't a logistics map anymore. It was a spreadsheet. Gregory Mitchell, corporate card, $8,842 unauthorized expenses. The Ritz-Carlton, Cabo, $4,200. Balenciaga, Chicago, $1,800. Best Buy, Home Theater, $2,400. Audi lease. Down payment, $5,000. The list scrolled. It went on and on. "You didn't just steal Toby's work, Greg," Sarah said, her voice cold and hard. "You stole from the company. My company." Greg backed up until he hit the whiteboard. "Your company?" "I am the majority shareholder of Halloway Global," Sarah said, every word a hammer blow. "My uncle was Frederick Halloway. I own the building you're standing in. I own the desk you sit at. And I own the lawyers who are about to destroy you." Greg looked at David Ross. "David, you knew." "I found out this morning," David muttered. "You're on your own, Greg." Greg looked back at Sarah. The arrogance was gone. He looked small. He looked like the man he really was, insecure and hollow. "Sarah, please," he tried, his voice cracking. "We can talk about this." "The prenup. We can tear it up. I made a mistake. Tiffany, she means nothing to me. It's always been you. You know that, right? We're a team." He took a step toward her, reaching out a hand. Sarah didn't flinch. She didn't retreat. She looked at his hand with utter disgust. "We were never a team, Greg," she said. "I was your stepping stone, and you just stepped off a cliff." She turned to the security guards who had quietly entered the room. "Escort Mr. Mitchell out. He is to retrieve nothing from his office. His personal effects will be mailed to him, once we deduct the cost of the stolen funds from his final paycheck, which, by my calculation, means he owes us about $12,000. "You can't do this!" Greg screamed as the guards grabbed his arms. "I made you. You were nothing without me." "I was invisible," Sarah corrected him, her voice ringing through the room. "But now, everyone sees me. Goodbye, Greg." They dragged him out, his heels skidding on the carpet, shouting obscenities until the heavy doors slammed shut. Sarah stood in the silence. Her heart was pounding, but her hands were steady. She looked at the board members. She looked at Toby, who was staring at her with awe. "Toby," Sarah said, smoothing her blazer, "you're the new acting director of sales. Get that Detroit proposal fixed. I want it on my desk by Monday." Toby nodded furiously. "Yes, Miss Holloway, thank you." Sarah sat down at the head of the table. "Now," she said to the board, "let's get to work." The walk from the executive conference room to the elevator was only 50 feet, but for Greg Mitchell, it felt like a death march across a desert. He was flanked by 2 security officers, men he had never bothered to learn the names of, men he had walked past every morning without a nod. Now one of them, a burly man with a scar on his chin, held Greg's elbow with a grip that wasn't painful, but was firm enough to say, "Don't even think about running." The office was silent. The bullpen, usually buzzing with the sound of sales calls and typing, had gone dead quiet. Heads poked up over cubicle walls. Eyes tracked him. There wasn't pity in those gazes. There was a mix of shock and schadenfreude. Greg had been a tyrant of a manager, the kind who stole commissions and publicly shamed people for being 2 minutes late. Seeing him dragged out by security wasn't a tragedy for the floor staff. It was live entertainment. "I need to get my things," Greg muttered, his voice sounding thin and reedy in the quiet air. "My contacts list. My accolades." "Your personal effects will be mailed to you, Mr. Mitchell," the guard said, pressing the down button for the elevator. "Strict instructions from Miss Holloway. You have no access to company property or data." Miss Holloway. The name hit Greg like a physical slap. Sarah. His Sarah. The woman who used to hunt for coupons for fabric softener. The woman who wore socks with holes in the toes because she wanted him to have the better winter boots. She was Miss Holloway. The elevator doors slid open. Greg was shoved gently inside. As the doors closed, he caught one last glimpse of the office. He saw Toby standing near the water cooler, holding the Detroit file, looking at Greg not with fear, but with a strange, adult pity. The doors shut, sealing his fate. The unraveling of Greg's life didn't happen all at once. It happened in agonizing, humiliating stages, like a building being demolished brick by brick. The first blow was the legal reality. Greg hired a lawyer he found on a billboard near the highway, a man named Saul, who smelled faintly of cigar smoke and desperation. Greg sat in Saul's cramped office, explaining the situation with frantic energy. "It's a wrongful termination suit, Saul," Greg insisted, pacing the stained carpet. "She's my ex-wife. She's vindictive. She set me up. I want to sue for defamation, emotional distress, and loss of future earnings. I want $10 million. Saul sighed, rubbing his temples. He opened the digital file that Holloway Global's legal team, Pendleton and O'Malley, had sent over an hour ago. "Greg," Saul said, his voice flat, "sit down. I don't want to sit down. I want justice." "Sit down," Saul barked. Greg sat. "There is no wrongful termination case," Saul said, turning the laptop screen around. "They sent over the forensic audit. Greg, you charged a $4,000 vacation to a corporate card and listed it as a client retention retreat for a company that doesn't exist. You bought a home theater system and expensed it as teleconferencing equipment. You leased a car with company funds. Everyone does it," Greg protested weakly. "It's the cost of doing business." "No, Greg. Everyone buys a sandwich and expenses it. You embezzled $45,000 in 4 months. That's not business. That's grand larceny. That's a felony." Greg felt the blood drain from his face. "Felony?" "The district attorney is already involved," Saul continued, mercilessly. "Holloway Global is pressing charges. They aren't looking for a settlement. They're looking for a conviction. They want to make an example of you. My advice? We beg for a plea deal. You pay back every cent, you accept probation, and you pray they don't push for jail time." "I can't pay it back," Greg whispered. "I spent it." "Then you better start selling things," Saul said, closing the laptop. "Because if you don't come up with that restitution money, you're going to prison." The second blow was the domestic collapse. Greg arrived at his apartment, the stunning, light-filled unit in the Loop that cost 3 times what he could afford, dreading the conversation with Tiffany. He needed her support. He needed her to tell him that he was still a king. that they would fight this together. He unlocked the door. The apartment was strangely echoed. He walked into the living room. The large abstract painting he had bought, on credit, was gone. The decorative vases were gone. He ran to the bedroom. The closet was open. Tiffany's side was bare. Her clothes, her shoes, her collection of handbags, all gone. On the bed, stripped of its silk sheets, was a single piece of paper. It wasn't a tear-stained letter. It was a printout of a screenshot. It was a text conversation between Tiffany and one of her friends. Friend: I saw the news on Twitter. Is it true Greg got fired for fraud? Tiffany: yeah, total loser energy. I'm packing now. He's broke and he's going to jail. I'm not about to be a prison wife. LOL. Greg crumpled the paper. He sat on the bare mattress and stared at the wall. He had left Sarah because he wanted someone who matched his aesthetic. He wanted a trophy. He had forgotten that trophies are inanimate objects, cold, hollow, and easily awarded to the next winner. Tiffany hadn't loved him. She had loved the lifestyle he projected. Once the projection flickered and died, she simply changed the channel. His phone buzzed. It was a notification from his bank. Alert. Your credit card ending in 4492 has been declined. Alert. Your credit card ending in 8810 is over the limit. Alert. Auto payment for Audi lease failed. The walls were closing in. The next 3 months were a blur of degradation. To avoid prison, Greg had to liquidate his entire existence. The Audi was repossessed in front of his neighbors, hooked up to a tow truck, while Greg stood on the curb, trying to look like he didn't care. The watch, the Tag Heuer he loved more than most people, was sold to a pawn shop for a fraction of its value. He was evicted from the apartment. He moved into a basement unit in a suburb an hour away from the city, a place that smelled of damp earth and mildew. It was worse than the apartment he had kicked Sarah out of. But the hardest part wasn't the poverty. It was the silence. His phone stopped ringing. The friends he had bragged to at the gala? They blocked his number. David Ross, his old fraternity brother. David had testified against him in the deposition to save his own skin. Greg Mitchell, the man who thought he was the protagonist of the universe, realized he was actually just a minor villain in someone else's story. And his part was over. He applied for jobs. He applied for sales roles, management roles, even entry-level consultant gigs. But the background check always came back with the same red flag: termination for cause, embezzlement. In the corporate world, he was radioactive. Meanwhile, 40 stories above the city, Sarah Halloway was exhausted, but she had never felt more alive. She sat in the founder's office, her office now. She had redecorated. The heavy dark woods and leather of her uncle's era were gone, replaced by cream tones, modern art, and light. Arthur Pendleton sat across from her, reviewing the Q4 reports. The Detroit restructuring is complete, Arthur said, looking over his spectacles. Toby Evans has done a remarkable job leading the transition. The kid has potential. Give him a raise, Sarah said immediately, not looking up from her tablet, and stock options. I want him to know he has a future here. Done, Arthur noted it down. He paused. There is one other matter, Sarah. The restitution check from Mr. Mitchell arrived this morning. It's for $46,000. Apparently he liquidated his 401k and sold his vehicle to cover it. Sarah stopped typing. She looked out the window at the sprawling Chicago skyline. Did he accept the plea deal? She asked. He did. 5 years probation. He avoids jail, but he is barred from holding a fiduciary position in any publicly traded company for 10 years. Sarah nodded slowly. Do you want to see the check? Arthur asked. Some clients find it cathartic. Sarah thought about it. She thought about the moment Greg had tucked the $100 bill into her apron. She thought about the way he had sneered at her broken pasta bowl. No, Sarah said softly. Deposit it into the Employee Benevolent Fund. Use it to help the warehouse staff with childcare costs. Let his selfishness finally pay for something good." Arthur smiled, a rare, warm expression. "You've grown into this role, Sarah. Your uncle would have been terrified of you, and very proud." "I'm not doing it for him, Arthur," she said, turning back to her work. "I'm doing it for the Sarah who used to be afraid to speak up. I promised her I wouldn't let her down again." 6 months later, the charity gala for the Chicago Arts Initiative was the event of the season. It was held in the grand ballroom of the Palmer House Hotel. Crystal chandeliers dripped light onto the shoulders of the city's elite. Sarah hadn't wanted to come, but Holloway Global was a platinum sponsor, so her attendance was mandatory. She wore a gown of deep emerald green velvet that hugged her frame, a subtle nod to the color of money, but executed with a taste level Greg could never have comprehended. She moved through the crowd with grace. She didn't need to shout to be heard anymore. When she spoke, people leaned in. She was a billionaire, a titan of industry, a woman who had taken a legacy company and modernized it in under a year. "Sarah," a voice called out. It was Linda, her old boss from the catering company. Sarah froze for a moment, then turned. Linda looked nervous, holding a clipboard. She was working the event, managing the staff. "Hello, Linda," Sarah said, smiling warmly. I just wanted to say," Linda stammered, smoothing her apron. "I saw you in the magazines. I had no idea. About your family. About everything." "Neither did I, for a long time," Sarah said. "You look happy," Linda said. "Different, but happy." "I am," Sarah replied. "How is the team?" "Busy. We're short-staffed tonight, actually. Had to hire a bunch of temps from an agency just to cover the floor. You know how it is." "I do," Sarah nodded. "I remember the hustle. Make sure they get a good meal at the end of the shift, Linda." Sarah moved on, taking her seat at the head table. The first course was being served, a delicate lobster bisque. The servers moved in a synchronized line, placing bowls down with practiced efficiency. Sarah was talking to the mayor of Chicago on her left when a hand placed a bowl in front of her. The hand was shaking slightly. Sarah glanced at the hand. It was rough, the skin dry and chapped. There was a faint, pale line on the wrist, a tan line where a heavy watch used to sit. She looked up. The server was wearing a white jacket that was a size too big. His hair was thinning, combed over in a desperate attempt to hide the recession. His face was gaunt, etched with lines of stress and sleeplessness. He looked 10 years older than he had 6 months ago. It was Greg. Their eyes locked. For a moment, the sounds of the gala, the string quartet, the laughter, the clinking of silverware, faded into a dull roar. Greg stared at her. He saw the emerald gown. He saw the diamond earrings catching the light. He saw the way the mayor was waiting for her to finish a sentence. He saw a woman who was light years beyond his reach. And Sarah saw him. She saw the man who had discarded her. She saw the man who had called her dead weight. In his eyes, she saw sheer, unadulterated terror. He was waiting for her to speak. He was waiting for her to say, "Oh, look, everyone. It's my ex-husband. The embezzler." He was waiting for her to snap her fingers and have him thrown out, just as he had tried to do to her. He was bracing for the blow. Sarah looked at him for 3 long seconds. She saw the sweat on his upper lip. She saw the name tag pinned crookedly to his jacket. Greg, temp staff. Slowly, Sarah picked up her spoon. "Thank you," she said. Her tone was polite, dismissive, impersonal. It was the tone one uses for a vending machine or an automatic door. She turned back to the mayor. "As I was saying, Mr. Mayor, the logistics of the Port Authority need to be re-evaluated." She didn't look back at him. Greg stood there, frozen. The dismissal was worse than a scream. If she had screamed, it would have meant he still mattered. It would have meant he still had the power to hurt her. But this polite thank you, it meant he was nothing. He was just a hand serving soup. He was part of the background scenery of her magnificent life. He turned and walked back towards the kitchen, his legs feeling like lead. He pushed through the swinging doors into the clamour of the scullery. "Move it, Temp!" the kitchen manager shouted at him. "Table 4 needs water. Stop daydreaming." "Yes," Greg whispered. "Yes, sir." He grabbed a water pitcher. He walked back out onto the floor, keeping his head down, navigating the world of the wealthy, a world he was once a tourist in, but was now permanently exiled from. Sarah left the gala early. Her driver, a stoic man named Thomas, opened the door of the town car for her. "Home, Miss Holloway?" "Yes, Thomas. Take the Lakeshore Drive. I want to see the water." As the car glided through the dark street, Sarah took a deep breath. She reached into her clutch and pulled out her phone. She opened her contacts list. She scrolled down to Greg Mitchell. She had kept the number blocked for months, but now she realized she didn't even need the block. She hit delete contact. A prompt popped up. "Are you sure you want to delete this contact? This action cannot be undone." Sarah smiled. "Yes," she whispered. She pressed the button. The name vanished. She looked out the window at Lake Michigan, a vast, dark expanse meeting the sky. The future was wide open. The past was a closed book, and she had just written the final word. Sarah Holloway closed her eyes, and for the first time in years, she rested. The war was over. She had won. And that, my friends, is the ultimate revenge. Not screaming, not fighting, but simply outgrowing the person who tried to keep you small. Greg ended up exactly where he belonged, serving the woman he thought wasn't good enough for him. And Sarah? She proved that the best response to disrespect isn't anger, it's success. It's a brutal reminder. Be careful who you step on while you're climbing the ladder, because you might just meet them on your way back down. I want to know, do you think Sarah went too easy on him by just ignoring him? Or was that polite thank you the most savage thing she could have done? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. If you stuck around for the whole story, type "The Queen Reigns" in the comments, so I know you're a real one. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell for more stories of karma, revenge, and justice. Until next time,